He invited me to his house, and the whole place was open to me, like he wasn't ashamed to show me a thing. Besides his parents' room, of course. At the time, I thought it was an issue of privacy, but it didn't concern me. For the first time in my life, I felt a cavalcade of loving emotions brewing under the surface, all of them for this one man. My second true friend. But not even that could I begin to describe how I felt towards him. He'd walk me to school, hug me in the hallways, kiss me passionately when no one saw. Every moment was savored. He filled me with joy, anxiety, fear, anger. He filled me with life. He was marvelous. It was marvelous. It was terrifying. He had a hold on me that I could not shake. Every word he said carried so much weight, and while he said he accepted me, that he loved me, I could not shake this feeling that a part of him was disgusted by me and my addiction. Yes, even though I was happy with him, even though he was happy with me, I still felt this barrier between us. And no matter how much I tried, the only way I knew to break through a barrier is to cut through it. But we never talked about it. I didn't want to acknowledge it, because I didn't want him to acknowledge it. He'd try, of course he'd try. But I tried harder. I tried so hard to keep myself whole, with no scars, no cuts, because I wanted him to see me as whole as I saw him. Your father, while not a social butterfly, was far more social than I. He had long-standing friendships that were almost mythical, like his friendship with your Aunt Yuri. Every person that talked to him would have a smile so wide it was only matched by his own. He could do things that I could only imagine, like carry a conversation with Natsuki. It all came so naturally to him, and he could do it with anyone. I was terrified that the way he made me feel was temporary, that it could be ripped away from me in a second. Because while I smiled wide with him, and he smiled wide with me, he smiled wide with others as well. Others who didn't need him to smile. I had walked down this path before, that need for an outlet to feel. He was a new addiction that I couldn't control. I saw it on the horizon, and I knew I didn't want that. I knew there was something wrong with my soul, and I couldn't bear it to him. And one day, he caught me with my first friend as we were getting intimate. He tried to reason with me, tried to calm me down. But I tried harder to push him away.
She begins to sniffle as her covered arms reach to wipe her tears.
The next day, everything returned to normal. I walked into the club and sat on my own, immersing myself into my novel. I never struggled to be happy on my own. Why would I start now? I stopped trying to talk to my club members, for the damage had already been done. They saw my corrupted soul. There was no need to burden them with more. It's all quite pathetic, isn't it? Seeing your mother weep over her time in high school. I'd like to think that I've grown past it, but sometimes, my dearest, some feelings can't be shed. They can be dealt with, they can be controlled, but never abandoned. Some feelings become a part of you, digging their long, sharp tendrils into you. But you must know, you have to know. Their tendrils might be dug into you, but they don't have you pinned down. They have nowhere to pin you besides the walls that you pin yourself to. They can slow you down, they can make the pain searing, they can make your thoughts agony, but they can never stop you from moving forward. She said something similar. I never expected her to sit down and talk to me the way she did. She was always closed off, even more than I. I don't know what brought it on. I had my ideas, the most prominent being that your father spoke to her about how he felt, because that was just the way he was. But otherwise, years from that moment, I still don't know why Natsuki sat down next to me after everyone had left and told me, "I'm sorry, Yuri." It happened months ago at that point, so I was baffled that she even brought it up. There's something funny about delayed apologies. Most think that if you don't apologize immediately, your attempts at repentance will fail. Yet a delayed apology done long after the fact, they always seem more genuine. At least to me. Because after all this time, after your life was restored, after everything returned to the status quo, after you had nothing to gain, you still thought you had to say, "I'm sorry." We sat down and talked, me and her. She told me her story, her pain, her trauma. It's not something I'm willing to share with you, even though I love you more than anyone, because it's hers to share. She told me that she lashed out at me because of the pain she suffered. She never really had a choice in her pain. She was forced to suffer through it, and she resented me because in her mind, I chose to suffer. But when she saw me sitting alone and saw your father wasn't close by, she thought that maybe that assessment wasn't entirely true. Afterwards, Natsuki told me about how, every day, she wanted to scream, to lash out, to cry, and she did. She screamed, she cried, she was abrasive every day. She knew that people looked down on her for acting the way she did, and she hated them because she didn't know how else to cope. She didn't understand how people could be so blind to her situation, until she realized she had done the same to me. She apologized profusely. It seemed that my assessment of her was wrong as well. She pushed me to restore my relationship with your father, but I shied away from engaging any further. She was vulnerable to me, but sometimes you aren't able to return that trust. Or bearing your soul to someone, while it may be the right thing to do, you may not be prepared to do it. She didn't quite understand, but she didn't contest me either. I found that odd, because all Natsuki ever did was contest me. That night, I laid in my bed, unable to find comfort in slumber. Natsuki left the room after her speech, and when I was in bed, I realized I didn't say anything. I didn't say a word. And she was staring. Was she talking to me? Was I there? Or was she recounting her regrets to an empty room that never had me in the first place? Everything was dark around me. Even the rays of moonlight didn't reach into my room. For the first time in a long time, I asked myself, am I dead? I rushed outside of the room. I thought I would never indulge in this again. I knew it was wrong. I knew it was wrong, but I did it anyway. Because I was weak and I couldn't stay away from it for very long. I rushed out of the darkness and I found myself standing at your father's door. It was the middle of the night, and he had that look he always has when someone wakes him up too early. His hair spiked up in every which way, and his nose lifted up as if he was struggling to breathe. One eye slightly closed, like he was half dreaming of being back in bed. But then he saw me standing outside, and it was like he was shocked awake. And your father, the absolute dork that he is, looked at my teary eyes and asked if I needed an umbrella. After that silly display, he led me into his empty house and catered to my every need. He brought out my favorite tea, opened up a box of tea cakes that he must have kept from me when we were still together, and he asked me what was wrong. And I don't know what came over me, but I couldn't find it in myself to tell him. No matter how much I needed to, I still never saw the logic in bearing my soul to him. Even though I trusted him with everything, with all that I was still afraid to trust him with my sin. Suddenly, he took me by the hand and led me upstairs. For a fleeting moment, the most peculiar thought came to my head. It might have helped in the moment, but even I knew he wasn't that daring. In an odd turn of events, he took me to the door of his parents' room. He asked me a question that I never thought he would ask. Yuri, do you believe in God? Personally, I didn't give it much thought till that day. My parents were never religious, and I never considered the concept of God a part of my life. So I answered no. He chuckled in that way your father chuckles when he knows he asked a question he already knew the answer to, and he said to me, "Neither do I." He opened the door to his parents' room, and it was strange, to say the least. It was like any room I'd ever been into, but there were slight differences. There were these large tapestries hung over the king-sized bed with peculiar lettering on them. There were mats with wonderful stitching hung carelessly on a chair by the side of the room. I asked him what it is that he wanted to show me. And your father, the man who I thought was whole, showed me his scars. Your father was an immigrant who came from a culture radically different from ours, but he was caught in a certain predicament. He never felt attached to his own culture. He was too separated from it. Or from it all. But he also never felt like he was part of our culture. A man of two worlds. This caused an impossible to heal rift between him and your grandparents. It was such a foreign concept to me, since through all my struggles, I never felt like I didn't have a home. That dissonance he experienced every day guided his actions, hence why he always tried to make a good impression, to make people smile. He wanted to fit in, to feel like he was a part of it all. When I saw him sitting on his parents' empty bed, hunched over, trying his hardest to stop himself from falling apart as he bared his soul to me, I sat next to him and embraced him, because I knew he was at least a part of me. He elaborated further on why he told me all this, for it wasn't just an effort to relate to me. He recounted that his parents, trying to mend the rift between your father and what they thought was his home, wanted him to embrace their religion. They were devout Muslims, you see. They believed in the Quran's holy teachings and following the example set by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Your father, for all his attempts to appease his parents and their wishes, could never find the drive in him to believe in all that. Religion was always a part of his life, but he could only see it as another limit on a life that was entirely outside of his control. Hence why he had so proactively and so provocatively courted me before, even though it went against the teachings of his religion. However, he remembered a lesson his mother imparted onto him about the nature of worshipping God, as she was trying to convince him to adopt the practices. Religion wasn't something grandiose and mythical, such as the punishments of hellfire and brimstone waiting for the sinners, or the bliss and comfort waiting for the believers. It was concerned with the personal, the struggles of the soul, and the safety of the idea of an all-knowing God who saw you. An atom compared to his mightiness. As significant and important as his own child. Your father knew that I could not trust people with my soul, with my sin. So he asked me if I could believe in Allah for a moment, and find safety in bearing my soul to the entity that may have created it. He was just trying to find a way to help, really. Like I said moments before, your father wasn't religious, but it was the only thing he could think of. And there was so much I wanted to say to him, but I couldn't. And then I began to finally understand. It was out of my control. I was never going to be able to say it to him. But maybe, just maybe, I could say it to him. He walked me through the procedure of it all. The ablution up before prayer, the proper clothing one must wear during prayer, and then how exactly one prayed. He led the prayer, a ritualized practice that his father taught him but he never used. And in that prayer, I felt something new. It wasn't joy, it wasn't anger, it wasn't anxiety, it wasn't sadness. It was calm. I didn't feel anything, but I didn't feel nothing either. That hollowness that I was scared of for so long. It was recontextualized. I spoke my mind and my heart to the only being that could ever understand the language its beats spoke. Each lingering feeling that I felt since the day I thought I was dead came flooding out during the silent moments between each movement of the prayer. Your father spoke and guided me in a language I didn't understand, but I still felt safe because for some reason I knew he understood. Finally, we finished the prayer with Taslim, as we wished peace and harmony to the angels who rested on our shoulders and recorded our deeds. He turned around to me with his gentle smile, told me, Takabala, Allah, Allah. I asked him what that meant, and he said that it meant, Allah accepts. From then on, I immersed myself in the study of the religion, trying to learn the passages from the Quran, and over time, I accepted Allah in my heart. Every time I felt like a wisp, Allah grounded me. Every time I felt far from feeling, Allah filled me with life. When my feelings became too hard to bear, Allah lifted the burden from me. When I was alone, I no longer had to find a substitute to fill the hole it left in me, for Allah was always with me. I trusted him with my soul as he brought purity and guidance to a life that I couldn't have imagined for myself. As your father and I rekindled our relationship, my new relationship with God brought us problems. Your father still didn't really understand religion and resented the boundaries it placed on us, but knowing how much belief helped me, he went along with it. At the very least, it made introducing me to your grandparents far easier. I became more palpable up to my classmates, even if my outward embrace of Islam was hard for them to adjust to. But the truth is, they were just happy to see me find some peace. After all, that's what friends want for each other, right?